What is up, guys? I'm going to be updating some of my lists for the $200 price range. Some of these are budget phones, some of these are flagships. So let's go ahead and get started with the most dramatic price change. Is going to be the LG G8. Now, if you pick this one up locked on AT&T, you can get it for around $200, and if you pick up the unlocked renewed version, you can get it for $260, which is an absolute steal. You're basically getting a flagship for a budget phone price. This is a glass and metal design. I've talked about this phone 1,000 times on the channel. IP68, dust and water resistant. My favorite thing about this phone is the P OLED display. It has really deep blacks. You can take advantage of the always on display. It's a 6.1 inch 1440p display, 564 for the PPI, extremely sharp. Really love watching content on this guy. So you do have Android 10 already installed on here. You have the LG UX 9.0, so very fast. LG skin is actually pretty snappy. So you have the Snapdragon 855 and the Adreno 640. So pretty much what that means is that you can play pretty much any game on high settings. So that's what I really love about this phone. If you're a gamer, you're really going to be looking at this phone for gaming and just overall multitasking and stuff. It's got 6 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage. So this is an overall spec beast for this price point. You're not going to find anything better. So you do have micro SD support as well, which I love. The cameras on here are pretty great as well. So you have a 12 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You can also shoot in 4K 60 or 30 FPS, which is great. And you also have a selfie camera that shoots in 8 megapixels and shoots at 1080p 60 frames per second. The headphone jack is here with the quad DAC, so if you're really into listening to music on your phone, this is something that you'll really appreciate. So you do have NFC on board as well for your mobile payments. You also have the fingerprint scanner on the back. It's a physical one, which is pretty snappy, and you have your wireless charging, fast charging at 21 watts with a pretty nice 3,500 milliamp battery. You can definitely get through the day with this. Really about a day and a half if you're a light user, so super solid battery life. Next is going to be the Moto G8 Plus. So you can pick this guy up for around 200 bucks even, and I like this phone way more than I thought I would. So you have a plastic design, but I actually really like the design on here. I think it's really cool. It is a splash resistant design, but it's not, IP rated. You have a pretty nice size 6.3 inch display. It's 1080p, 400 for the PPI. It's IPS, but it's actually a really nice display. It's a high quality IPS display, and I really enjoy watching content on here. You have the little water drop notch, which is not too intrusive. You do have Android 9, and the thing about this phone is that it's going to get Android 10, but what I like is that Motorola strips Android back. They don't add any bloatware, they don't add anything to it. They just have the Moto app on here with the gestures and all that stuff. Otherwise, it's pretty much stock Android, which is something that I think a lot of people will appreciate. So you do have the Snapdragon 665 and the Adreno 610 on here. So you can play games on here just fine. I didn't notice a serious lag when playing my favorite games, Call of Duty Mobile, etc. So gaming on here is fine. So you do have micro SD support as well as 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. So the cameras on here are actually pretty decent for this price point. You have a triple camera setup, at 48 megapixel wide, a 16 megapixel ultra wide, and you also have a 5 megapixel depth sensor that shoots in 4K at 30 FPS. You have a 25 megapixel selfie camera that shoots in 1080p 30 or 120 frames per second, which is nice. My favorite thing about this phone is the stereo speakers. So they are pretty loud, and I wish pretty much every phone has a stereo speaker. Use the front grille as a speaker. Definitely does make a difference. These are some pretty crisp and loud speakers here. So you do have NFC on board as well on this US model. You also have the fingerprint scanner on the back, which again is pretty fast, and you have a 4,000 milliamp battery, and the battery life on here is actually pretty good. So I'm able to get through a day no problem on this guy. So this is a super solid option if you're a Motorola fan. Next is going to be the LG G7. So I started to take this off the list because I put it on every list, but it's just a really great phone. You can find this exactly at 200 or way below. The price does fluctuate a lot, and I like this phone a lot because you can pretty much do anything you want on this phone. So it's got a 6.1 inch display, 1440p. It's an IPS display. 564 for the PPI. Just a really nice display. So you do have a very nice premium glass and metal design. It's IP68 rated, pretty much a flagship phone. You do have Android 9 on here, as well as the Snapdragon 845 and the Adreno 630. So again, you can play pretty much every game on high, from Fortnite, PUBG to Call of Duty Mobile. All that works on here with really no frame drops. So this will actually get Android 10 this year as well, which is nice. You have micro SD support, 64 gigs of storage and 4 gigs of RAM on here, so the phone does not lag really at all. It's been super snappy since I've been using it. You have a dual camera setup. It's a 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide, shooting 4K 30-60 FPS. And the cameras on here, they're decent for this price point. I recommend downloading Gcam to get the best out of it, but you can definitely get some really good shots with this camera. So you have an 8 megapixel selfie camera that shoots in 1080p 60 FPS. The headphone jack on here with the quad DAC, again for music listeners, but the best thing with this phone is actually the single firing speaker. It's really great. It's loud and it has some really excellent quality, and I mean, it is really nice for a single firing speaker. It's one of the best that I've heard. So you do have NFC on here for mobile payments. The fingerprint scanner again is fast. You have a 3000 milliamp battery, which the battery life, I believe you get around 7 hours and 30 minutes of screen on time, which is definitely fine for a day. You do get 18-watt fast charging and wireless charging as well, so one of my favorites still to this day. Next is going to be the Note 8, and I was extremely impressed with this phone because of the build quality and the price. You can find this actually for $167 right now on Amazon. Very good deal. It actually has a glass design on here, which is really nice. Gorilla Glass 5, which is just excellent. It's crazy. It's got a really nice weight to it. It's one of my favorite things about this phone for this price point. So you do have a 6.3-inch IPS display. It is 1080p 409 for the PPI. Very nice, bright, colorful display. No issues with the display at all. You have Android 9 with MIUI 11, so this will get Android 10. And if you never use MIUI, it's got a whole bunch of features that you could really take advantage of, from the gestures to second space to pretty much anything that you would want. It's feature packed, so that's one thing I really love. Snapdragon 665 and the Adreno 610 on here. We did a gaming test on here if you want to check that out on the channel. Plays games just fine, no real issues. You're not going to max everything out obviously, but you know, for casual gaming it's just fine. You have micro SD support along with 32 gigs of storage and 3 gigs of RAM on here, so sometimes I'll notice animation stutters, but overall the phone seems to be pretty snappy. You do have a quad camera setup on here, a 48 megapixel wide and 8 megapixel ultra wide, a 2 megapixel macro, which I think is really underrated. Really love macro cameras. And you have a 2 megapixel depth sensor, shoots in 4K 30 FPS, front facing 13 megapixels 1080p. So the cameras on here are actually very acceptable. Like I said, I really like the macro camera, but you get good dynamic range. The color science is pretty good for this price point, so overall for this price point the cameras are super solid. So you do have a 3.5mm jack as well as a infrared port, and you are missing the NFC, so no mobile payments on this phone. So you do have the fingerprint scanner, which is of course really fast, and a 4000 milliamp battery with 18-watt fast charging, so the battery life is actually pretty good. You can definitely get through a day, again, no problem. I know I said top 5, but I want to throw in an honorable mention is the LG V40. This is an overall beast. You can think of this as like the blown up you know, big version of the G7, and this phone ranges for around $200 if you want to get it renewed. So you do have again the IP rating, the glass and metal design, but the difference here is the POLED display, and it's actually a much bigger display at 6.4 inches, 1440p 537 for the PPI, so you get that always on display function instead of the IPS, which is awesome. So you will get Android 10 on this one. You have the same Snapdragon 845, Adreno 630, which again is going to be great for gaming, micro SD support, but this one has 6 gigs of RAM on here, so you have more RAM on this base model than on the G7, and you also have 64 gigs of internal storage. You also have the same camera setup, but you have a telephoto lens on the V40, which is great. So 12 megapixel telephoto, 16 megapixel ultra wide, 12 megapixel standard, shoots in 4K 30-60 fps. You also have a dual camera setup on the front for group selfies, 8 megapixel and a 5 megapixel wide. You have the headphone jack, quad DAC, all that stuff. So like I said, it's basically the G7 NFC fingerprint scanner. Now the battery life is actually the worst out of the G7 and G8. You get around 6 hours and 30 minutes, so you can get through a full day, but you're definitely going to be charging at the end of the day. So this is an overall super solid phone. So thanks for watching this video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.